Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today I am going to be reviewing Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third secret project, part of the Year of Sanderson. I have read Tress. I did not read the second secret project. I don't know if or when I will ever get around to reading that. I was really just kind of interested in the Cosmere reads that came along with the secret projects, so that definitely included this book. Overall, I really liked it. I think I actually like this more than Tress. I gave this a solid 4-star ranking, and yeah, this one is definitely ahead of Tress for me. I thought Tress was a really fun read, kind of got me out of a reading slump, but I think I'm just a little bit of a sucker for romance, and that is definitely prevalent in this book, so I enjoyed it. Now, I will be curious on if the final secret project book, The Sunlit Man, will be able to pass this one up on their rankings. I think that would be an interesting ranking. I think I see most people have either Tress or Sunlit Man in first place, but I think it'd be interesting if this was actually my favorite of the three Cosmere reads. So just in case you don't know, what is this book about? This body-swapping story follows Yumi, a Yokihedra who is charged with going to villages and summoning spirits to more or less grant wishes for the villagers. Painter is exactly that. He is tasked with capturing nightmares in his paintings, protecting his city from their attacks. When Painter wakes up in Yumi's body, they just have to work together to figure out what is going on. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some things that I really liked about this story and some things that didn't work for me quite as well. So the first positive I want to mention here is the worlds. And I say worlds because you get dual perspectives. You have Yumi's world and you have Painter's world, and they're both very, very different. Painter's world is a much more modern society. They have modern things like showers and lights, and while yes, there are certain ways that the technology works, like they even have TV, and the way they work is, you know, magically related, it is really interesting. It's kind of cool to see a Cosmere world that far into the future. We know that the Cosmere is progressing and that the timeline of when these stories are taking place are kind of all over the place. Obviously, we saw some things in Tress that, you know, give you an idea of when that was going on in the timeline as well, but I did find that interesting. And then you have kind of the opposite side of that, and you have Yumi's world. Yumi's world is a much more traditional world. It doesn't have the flares and the technology that you see in Painter's world. Now, in Yumi's world, you do have some very interesting plant life and some things that go on with that, and some interesting world building things like the ground is just really hot and things like that. I found it just kind of really interesting. And also, one thing I forgot to mention in Painter's world is there's this thing called the shroud, so that there's no sunlight there. They have to use, they're called Heon lines that kind of light things up and affect the world around them. And that is actually where the nightmares come from, is that shroud. And so yeah, just that kind of duality of a more, I don't want to say hyper modern world compared to, you know, what we see in like the real world, but when you compare Painter's, you know, technology to what Yumi has, I found that duality really interesting, and I really think it just kind of placed the fish out of water kind of aspect on both of the characters instead of it just kind of being one or the other. I don't know, it was just kind of that, you know, little benefit to this story that I really enjoyed. Now, to me, the most important thing in this story is the characters. To me, and I have these in my negatives, the plots, the magic system, all of that things are definitely left by the wayside, really for the characters. Now, specifically, it is really Yumi and Painter's story, but I will mention quickly that some of the side characters, I thought they were fun. I did think it was funny. They're supposed to be a character who's like obsessed with like bodybuilding and stuff. And fun fact about me is I follow bodybuilding, powerlifting, strongman, basically as my second favorite sport to football. And so reading some of the things that Sanderson had that character doing was just, you know, when you're like an expert in something and somebody who is not starts saying things in a realm you're very knowledgeable on, that's kind of the vibe I got from some of the things that character was saying, who was just very obsessed with like working out and stuff. I think he called it a lat press, which I would love to know what that is. I just found that really funny. So just to, you know, a little tidbit there with that character. But in general, I thought that the rest of the characters were fine. I think they were kind of like a light seasoning to the main story, which is Yumi and Painter. Now, I will say, I think there's a difference between Yumi as an individual character, Painter as an individual character, and then the combination of Yumi and Painter. I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I don't think Painter is a person that I would want to be around or hang out with or be a friend with. I can't really explain why in much detail because it's a huge spoiler for the book, but you know, I can kind of see why he maybe wasn't the most popular person anymore. And I mean, yes, there are like some thematic reasons about that, and like I said, I won't go into it because of spoilers, but he, you know, there's just something about him that I did find slightly frustrating on his own. And I also found things slightly frustrating with Yumi on her side. She is so subservient and so obedient and so just straightforward, I don't know, just on a rail. And it's funny that they're both kind of like the extremes of each other in some sense. And so getting them to come together finally was just brilliant. And not even just the romance part, but just their interactions together as characters and kind of pushing each other's boundaries and how they worked together, didn't work together, the strife, the differences, how they took those and then ended up being able to appreciate each other in different ways, I think was beautiful. I think that, those two characters coming together like that is easily the best part of this book. And maybe, I don't know, this is just how I feel about it. I don't know if other people really feel the same way about it, but to me, this is such a slice of life character study. I mean, we get so much time where they're really not doing anything that's important or that's really moving the plot along in a really meaningful, important way, but we're just kind of with these two characters together. And it's just, them exploring themselves and each other, their worlds, their differences, their similarities. And I don't know, I thought it was just super, super well done, really enjoyed it. And then I guess there is a romance aspect to this book, and I think I'm just a little bit of a sucker for romance. The will they, won't they kind of aspect of a story, just, I don't know, for whatever reason, I really like it. It works for me. I don't think I would ever want to read just like a straight romance book, but a fantasy story that has like a good romance in it. If you know one, let me know. I don't need like Sarah J. Maas level of like stuff, but something where there's like a strong romance where like two characters like really love each other. Man, if you've got a good recommendation for that, that's kind of what this book made me crave a little bit. So like I said, if you have a recommendation for that, please let me know. So the last positive I wanted to mention for the story itself is that there are some Cosmere stuff, some Cosmere implications, and some questions with the Cosmere that I now have after reading this. And I won't go into them. I don't want to spoil things because it's very connected to other places in the Cosmere. But, I really appreciate that. I've said it time and time again, but my goal this year was to read all of the Cosmere. And I only have to read The Sunlit Man now, and I will have completed that journey in 1 year of reading it all. So kind of experiencing this almost as one giant book, even though they're very separate and very different. There's a lot of different stories going on in here. All those connections and seeing where things fit together and like theories and all of the things have really elevated the experience of reading everything together to a level that I think if I read bits and pieces here, but not other things here, that I wouldn't enjoy everything as much. I think it would still all be really good, but I don't think I would enjoy it as much as I have because I'm reading it the way I am. One thing I do want to mention that I really enjoyed from this book, and it's actually from the physical book itself, is the artwork in this book is beautiful. I absolutely loved it. Now I know art is very subjective. I think I've heard a lot of people really like the tress, imagery and the pictures and artwork in there. And while I did like it, I thought it was really good. It's just not a style that I normally, relate with or really like and tend towards enjoying, but the art in Yumi was just perfect. I loved it so much. I listened to this on audio, but whenever they did a description of the artwork, I immediately paused it and pulled out the physical copy and went through and looked at the art. So if you have the opportunity, make sure you look at the art because it is super well done. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about some dislikes. And these dislikes are really light because, like I said, this story to me at least is really a slice of life of Yumi and Painter. And so a lot of the things that I don't like would definitely bring this book down in a normal, more straightforward, plot-driven story. But because that's not what this story is, these complaints are not nearly as impactful to my ranking or enjoyment of the story. There are things that I noticed, but in general, they just really didn't affect it because I just was there with Yumi and Painter, and I loved being there. With that being said, I will say the plot does drag a little bit, and it's it's not that big of a deal, but there were maybe 1 or 2 times where it's like, are we getting somewhere with this story? It just kind of seemed like a few times a lot of time was passing without really anything happening, and I maybe would have liked just a little bit more sprinkled in there, but then again, I really just enjoyed the time I spent with Yumi and Painter, but I could definitely see some people not liking that progression of the plot. And, it just really kind of seems to drag, and not a whole lot is going on for a lot of this. Like, we're spending time taking showers and baths and that kind of thing, which to me was great, but I can really see why for some people that would not work. I will say Sanderson is definitely known for his magic systems. Obviously Mistborn's magic system is kind of like the gold standard to me. And I will say, I didn't really care about either of the magic systems in this story. I thought that they were fine, they were acceptable, kind of interesting, but also kind of boring at the same time. And I don't know if it's maybe I just don't appreciate art the way it needs to be appreciated to understand like the things that are going on there. But for me, the magic systems were like an afterthought to me. I don't think to Sanderson himself he thought they were, but to me it just, I didn't really care. There didn't need to be hardly any magic in this book for me to care and for me to enjoy it. I think the amount of magic in this book probably could have been like 0.5 and I still would have just enjoyed this story to the same level that I do. Now obviously that would have had issues for the plot and everything, but I don't care. I'm sure Sanderson could have found a way around that and just kind of wrote this, slice of life story with Yumi and Painter. But yeah, in general, the magic systems aren't anything to write home about. I will say, this is kind of two things in one. I will say there is kind of a lack of a really forceful antagonist. I think stories sometimes are made by their antagonists. There are plenty of books where there's a character that I just hate so much that I read it and I hate that character so much, but it makes the experience that much better. And yes, there's definitely like an antagonistic force in this story, but it just wasn't overly strong. And once again, it's that slice of life thing. I don't think it matters as much, but you need some kind of conflict, I think, with the way this story is structured. And I think it could have been a little bit more intertwined into the story. I mean, it is, but I think if you've read this, you'll understand what I'm saying. And if you haven't read it yet, just know that there isn't a typical antagonist like in a lot of books. And I will also say there is a big expedition dump towards the end of this book that I think if that wasn't inserted, I would have been still so confused, because I think I still am a little bit confused about some of the things and workings that happen in this book. I think I maybe am starting to get it. I've watched some videos trying to help me understand it, but I think without that big expedition dump, I really would have been lost. So I'm definitely glad that that got added in there. I wonder if that was a planned thing or that was feedback from some beta readers or something, because I know I definitely needed it. But that is my overall thoughts for Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. Solid 4-star rankings. My favorite of the Secret project so far. Let me know what you thought about Yumi and the Nightmare Painter down below in the comments, and definitely let me know if you have a good romance fantasy read that you think I should consider. And as always, have a good one.